liquid nitrogen, and we spent the day dipping bananas into liquid nitrogen, smashing them on the walls, which for like a 6-year-old kid was pure delight. Awesome. I went back to school telling all my friends that I could shatter bananas and all this stuff. So it wasn't quite what you described, but I fisherman on my mom's side, and my girlfriend's family, she's got a long line of hunters and farmers. So I think they're going to put me to the test soon. But
well, here's the parents doing great things with their kids.
Well, and that's the question I was going to ask. Not to, in fact, to do the opposite of trivialize older generations teaching younger generations about what proper social interactions are. So the other thing I was thinking during your story is that this is how social dynamics and learning occurs in our species. Like if that series that was on Netflix, the Chimp Empire series, did you watch it?
Seen that. No.
Oh wow, fascinating, because it's all about social dynamics and chimps. Everything from covert gaze, and they're brutal to each other. They ostracize. It's very intense. And there's also a lot of beauty, but it's not just a bunch of like happy chimps. It's intense, warring between troops and so forth. But it makes you think about our species, right? And I'm raising a puppy right now, and I was raised a puppy before. She's better at it than I am already, of course. And I'm explaining to her, I said, the fastest way to train Stronger, our little bulldog mastiff, would be to get an older dog. Because here we are, like teaching it these human cues and trying to, but we really need to get into the mindset of a dog, and only a dog can really do that. Like they're so nose-led. They're great at sensing literally the autonomic tone of people around. They're sensitive to space. Here we are saying sit and stay, and they're like, they hear it, but like we're bringing them. It would be like us trying to learn how to use our noses to navigate. So it is a fact that within every species, the older members of that species teach the younger members of that species how to socialize. And I could rattle off lots of examples from my own life, but I won't, where I observed my mom and dad doing certain things in certain situations. And so while on the one hand, until now, I feel like we've been talking to kind of like the young listeners and stuff, the parents of kids or the to-be parents of kids or the siblings or the older or people who don't even have kids, like model them really good social interactions. I firmly believe, based on everything we've talked about today, that is every bit as critical as the person getting out there and pushing themselves past their anxiety to do the right things. We need to model better everyday social interactions. And so it's clear you did that in this example and in another example. So any ideas off the top of your head as to let's just call it like the 40 and up crowd? Like it's kind of on us to model really good social interactions, because that's how, just like Stronger would learn better from a dog. Learning from the internet is great, but a lot of kids don't have. Maybe they have a single parent, or they're away from their parents, or ship passed, or maybe mom or dad was kind of a nasty person, unhappy person, or overly outgoing and got them hurt. Like so, what do you recommend people do to model really good social interactions?
So pay attention to your habits. That's the most important thing. It's those little moments, and where I'm prone to a quick temper, and where I still have the college football player inside me. Well, I want to fix something, right? So if something's not going my way, I'm trying to fix it in some way, and so I still have that inside me from time to time, and I have to actively try to create habits that don't do that. So get out of a situation if I'm getting frustrated, rather than try to respond and correct it in that moment. But those little habits, that's where it shows up. People are watching. People are watching you in those moments. Those little things that you think aren't that important are what folks are paying attention to. In our research, when I think about how you apply the stuff we're learning in our experiments about people being overly pessimistic about how others will respond to them, the way you apply that in your own life isn't that you learn how to behave differently from learning this, is that you take that and you try to develop a little habit that then makes that something you do routinely over and over again. So for instance, one little thing that I started doing with this routine little habit in mind is I've made a habit when I get into my office, and it's now expanded kind of beyond that, but I started at the office. I was realizing one day that when I get to the office, where the door is to get in the building, I got maybe a 150-yard walk through the atrium in the middle of the building, to the elevators, up to the 4th floor, down to my office. And I was usually making that walk with my head down, focused on getting to work as quickly as I could. And I was passing all these people by without saying hello or hi or whatever. I was missing all these opportunities just to brighten my mood a little bit there. And so I started, doing a little happiness walk, a little hello walk when I go from the door to my office. Right now, when I walk in, I keep my head up. I smile and say hello to almost everybody I pass if I can, right? So this last quarter, Nigel's been sitting right here to my right when I walk in at the table, and Keith, who's got the biggest smile in the building, one of our custodial staff, is delightful. Mario's usually somewhere around the 2nd floor. I can give him a shout out on the way, and Zaya's often around the elevator when I walk in. Eric, Virginia, Jane, Emma, Joe, my colleagues when I walk in, I give them a shout out hello when I walk by their offices. And that whole thing, that just makes me a little brighter when I get to my office. And it's also created a habit that I now just do without thinking, right? And those little moments that become part of who you are, that's what people see. And I think as a parent, if you can think about how can you cultivate those habits to do these things routinely, because your kids are watching all the time, That's what's going to matter. I had a colleague one time, I thought this was very wise. He realized that he was sometimes swearing in class. And I sometimes am guilty of that too. That's my college football player. Come on, I got to be careful. Try not to do that. But I had one colleague who was adamant, and this is really what got me started thinking about this years ago, just you never slip up in class, because when you do that, there people see that and they think that's who you are and what's appropriate in that context, and it's just not where you want to be. So he's going to have never doing that anywhere in any part of his life, so that he also doesn't do it in class.
I like the notion of classroom rules. It's actually one of the only ways I've survived social media is I don't get into exchanges that I wouldn't get into in a classroom. And I also don't honor the presence of comments. People can say what they want about me, to a point. But when they start attacking each other, I always think, if we were back in an undergraduate or graduate medical school classroom, I would never let this exchange occur. And this is my website, so block.
Right.
And people go, oh, you're blocking things, you're deleting them. It's like, it's not to avoid criticism. It's like we're trying to keep a tone of education and respect, right? And it can be heated, but so I fully appreciate what you just said.
And I think the key to that is that it's not a huge thing. It's a small thing that you do routinely over and over again. And those small habits are important to keep in mind.
I've been told by some of the people that are regular kind of commenters and things that they feel safe to comment there, which tells me they feel unsafe to comment elsewhere. And the safe, unsafe thing, I'm not trying to use like snowflake language. I think like who wants to go online just for people to like be nasty, right? So there's a lot of goodness to be had by keeping classroom rules. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming here today and sharing. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule, and I also really appreciate the work you do. Also, thank you for writing a book, A Little More Social, How Small Choices Create Unexpected Happiness, Health, and Connection. Comes out very soon. Excited to read it. And I have to say, of all the guests we've ever had on this podcast, I think you represent kind of extreme example of somebody whose work has informed their life and life has informed their work. And that's somewhat straightforward to do when it always makes for kind of the easier, better, obvious choice. Like, oh, I did research, discovered, this style of cardiovascular exercise is better than that one, I'm going to do that one. But as you pointed out, it's brought many, many rewards than it has challenges. But in your case, your sensitivity to the theme of your work, which is that there's goodness and untapped beauty to be had in the spaces that we don't reflexively step into, and that maybe even we initially are a little averse to. That's where the real magic often lies, and you apply it in your own life in the realistic ways, and you benefit too. And that's the whole point. So thank you for being both a scholar and a shining example of what you taught us today.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been wonderful being here. I really appreciate it.
Come back again.
Thank you. I would love to.
Thank you for joining me for today's discussion with Dr. Nick Epley. To learn more about his work and to find a link to his new book entitled A Little More Social, How Small Choices Create Unexpected Happiness, Health, and Connection, please see the links in the show notes captions. If you're learning from and or enjoying this podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a terrific zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please follow the podcast by clicking the follow button on both Spotify and Apple. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. And you can now leave us a comment at both Spotify and Apple. Please also check out the sponsors mentioned at the beginning and throughout today's episode. That's the best way to support this podcast. If you have questions for me or comments about the podcast, or guests or topics that you'd like me to consider for the Huberman Lab podcast, please put those in the comment section on YouTube. I do read all the comments. For those of you that haven't heard, I have a new book coming out, my very first book. It's entitled Protocols, an Operating Manual for the Human Body. This is a book that I've been working on for over 5 years, and it's based on more than 30 years of research and experience. And it covers protocols for everything from sleep, to exercise, to stress control, protocols related to focus and motivation, and of course, I provide the scientific substantiation for the protocols that are included. The book is now available by pre-sale at protocolsbook.com, where you can find links to various vendors to pick the one that you want best. Again, the book is called Protocols, an Operating Manual for the Human Body. And if you're not already following me on social media, I am Huberman Lab on all social media platforms, like Instagram, X, Threads, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And on all those platforms, I discuss science and science-related tools, some of which overlaps with the content of the Huberman Lab podcast, but much of which is distinct from the information on the Huberman Lab podcast. Again, it's Huberman Lab on all social media platforms. And if you haven't already subscribed to our Neural Network newsletter, the Neural Network newsletter is a zero-cost monthly newsletter that includes podcast summaries as well as what we call protocols in the form of 1 to 3 page PDFs to cover everything from how to optimize your sleep, how to optimize dopamine, to limit cold exposure, or a foundational fitness protocol that covers cardiovascular training and resistance training. All of that is available completely zero cost. You simply go to hubermanlab.com, go to the menu tab in the top right corner, scroll down to newsletter, and enter your email. And I should emphasize that we do not share your email with anybody. Thank you once again for joining me for today's discussion with Dr. Nick Epley. And last, but certainly not least, thank you for your interest in science.
Everyone's focused on changing behavior. Everyone's focused on increasing willpower to overcome this tendency. And it's like, why not just change the tendency? That sounds so simple, but that's literally what we do in psychotherapy every day. When we come in and someone has a narcissistic personality disorder, this is personality. This is who they are. And we can psychotherapize them to be someone else, for their natural thoughts to change, for the way that they see the world to change, for their behaviors to change on its own. It doesn't work that willpower is necessary when you are trying to not be narcissistic. It is not necessary when you are no longer narcissistic. So we've done it in psychotherapy. We know that if your self-esteem changes, if your sense of being changes, treatment-refractory depression will change. Trauma, PTSD will change.
Welcome to the Human Design Podcast, science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. My guest today is Dr. Alok Kanodia, also known as Dr. K. Dr. K is a psychiatrist and online mental health educator. He has a very unique background, having trained and earned his medical degree in the United States, but also having studied as a monk for 7 years. Today we discuss powerful tools for increasing your self-understanding of mental health, and for rewiring your nervous system, specifically how you can unlearn unhealthy thought patterns and behaviors and replace them with ones that truly serve you and those around you. Much of today's discussion centers around differences between Eastern and Western concepts of things like the ego and what makes up our self-concept. That portion of the conversation will no doubt have you rethinking why you do what you do in virtually everything, and he provides a roadmap for clearly defining your best goals and for increasing things like your energy and drive, not through hacks, but by tapping into deep intrinsic motivation. In fact, throughout today's episode, Dr. K explains specific practices that you can use to help rewire your nervous system, resolve traumas, and come to a much clearer understanding of how best to apply your efforts in work, school, and relationships. We also discuss social media, dating, and relationships, addiction, and pornography. So a lot of topics covered. And I have to say, this is a conversation unlike any other that I have on or off the podcast. Dr. K offers a completely new perspective on how to resolve common struggles that we all face. And in doing so, he offers a lot of practical tools, so this should be a very valuable conversation for anyone wishing to better understand themselves at a theoretical and psychological level, but also who wishes to implement specific tools to improve some or all aspects of their life. Before we begin, I'd like to emphasize that this podcast is separate from my teaching and research roles at Stanford. It is, however, part of my desiring effort to provide zero cost to consumer information about science and science-related tools to the general public. In keeping with that theme, today's episode does include sponsors. And now for my discussion with Dr. Alok Kanodia. Dr. K, welcome.
Andrew Huber, thank you for having us.
So interested in you and the knowledge you hold. Today we're going to talk about a number of things. I mean, Ayurveda, East-West medicine, motivation, and dopamine. But I want to start with the internet.
Okay.
You got an interesting upbringing, so very different than mine, not just because of our age difference, but you grew up on the internet. Yeah, and so you really have an empathy for people on the internet, on social media. Now everyone's on the internet. What was it that drew you to screens and that interface with such a degree of magnetism?
You know, I was like a gifted kid growing up. And I think that one of the things that we don't really appreciate is how school moves at the pace of the sports kid. So school was incredibly boring for me. And I was also young, so I was a year ahead. And so I was like early on when I was a 5-year-old in first grade and I was competing against 7-year-olds on the playground or in gym class. That's not good sports. So the one thing that I really got addicted to was this idea of like a computer game where like when you beat level 1, like level 2 is fair. You know, and then if you beat level 2, like level 3 is there. If you fail at level 3, you get to try level 3 again. So it was the only activity that was like cognitively to my facing. And that really drew me in. And I didn't realize that until years later. You know, my parents were big fans of growing up in the school, young and skip grades. Great, life was great. And the faster you finish, the better things are. But I didn't realize how developmentally challenging it is to be like a 5-year-old or 6-year-old in school with like 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds. So I think that's what really drew me in.
You know, you were first generation parents from India. I mean, I grew up in the South Bay in Palo Alto, so I'm familiar with intense academic environments.
Sure, yeah.
Increasingly so in the last 10, 20 years, but even when I was there, it was intense. Did you feel that as pressure?
Absolutely. I mean, my earliest memories of my grandmother telling me.
What we're doing, I'm playing game. Little game.
Impressive. You know, so my 15-year-old brain was like, this like amazing idea of what a doctor was, and both my parents are doctors. My dad was an amazing doctor. I suppose my mom is too, but my dad is one of the seminal researchers in like vascular supposed disease. It's how he landed his job at MD Anderson, so he like came from India and like was an oncologist. And so I also remember like he used to, back then HIPAA wasn't, I think there wasn't even HIPAA. So he would have patients over his house and stuff like that. He would throw a Thanksgiving party every year where like he would invite all his patients, all cancer survivors and things like that. And so my dad was really like a mythical figure, incredibly charismatic. And so I was like, I'm going to be that. And so it became a huge part of my ego. And then it turns out that ego is not a great way to motivate. Well, it can be a great way to motivate yourself. But then I ran into trouble when I hit college because I never learned how to study. So either I absorbed everything and did well in the tests, so I went straight from like A's to F's, and then got addicted to video games straight out of college. But your original question was I into computers and why? And that probably has something to do.
It sounds like you were so into computers, you went to the cliff of computers with this addiction. But I want to talk about the addiction, but I think this is a perfect frame, and maybe we'll jump back to this as we move forward. This is a perfect frame for what I heard and wondered about why, which is, I'm a Gen X, okay? You're a millennial, and I'm told that the generation that behind Gen X perhaps had more love and encouragement to feel their feelings, notions of what trauma and addiction were, but maybe that there wasn't this universally high standards set for all of them. That's the narrative that you see in the news right now. Oh, this coddled generation, et cetera. You have high standards set for you. When you look out on your peers and you look out on the internet for millennials and younger, do you think that we can make a general statement about, yeah, all this appreciation and understanding about what addiction and trauma and feelings are, and that's just what's foreign to my generation, frankly, that it helped or hurt to have this awareness kind of self and what one needs and all of that? Do you think that do you think it helped or it hurt development?
Well, so Andrew, I'm delighted to be speaking to a scientist because I think it helped and hurt. Right. So this is, as you know, things are multifactorial. It's rarely one thing or another thing. So I think a lot of people picked up ground with awareness of feelings. As a psychiatrist, I work with people who were unaware of the family dynamics going on in their life, in their household, unaware of their emotions, going up to things like avoidance, attachment, and difficulty forming connections. So I think it is always good to be more aware. I think actually awareness is probably the single factor that correlates the most with like success and happiness. The challenge, the really subtle thing, is that talking about emotions isn't the same as actually being aware of them. So I think what started to happen is a lot of this dialogue around trauma, a lot of this dialogue around feelings, has actually been hijacked by other parts of our mind, other parts like, for example, our ego. And so
Magnolia 很胖 ，Magnolia 最臭。
It just happens. You can look at any population. And if you have someone who's like sociopathic, or if you have someone who's histrionic or narcissistic, and everyone is talking feelings, they will do that too, but in a sociopathic way. Feelings have now started to be used as a form of manipulation, right? So people will use, like I see this all the time, speaking of the internet and its modern incarnation. We all talk about boundaries, but people have started to use boundaries as a form of control for other human beings. My boundary is that you don't text anyone after 8 p.m. My boundary is that, every time I call you, you need to answer the phone. So it's really bizarre how, like, the basic, like, psychological stuff can hijack. Like, our psychological patterns can hijack, like, all this mental health stuff. And another really good example of this is, so I remember I was seeing an assault victim in the emergency room at Mass General Hospital many years ago. And so the MIT chief of security campus security was there. And so I was talking to them a little bit about, because there were other students with a student who had been assaulted, and they were kind of talking to me about safety. And I remember something that the MIT chief told me that I never forgotten. So we were talking about safety. He's like, my job is not to make people feel safe. My job is to make people safe. And there's actually a big difference. And so something interesting has happened. We've all become more narcissistic because that's what the internet does to us. And so now if I am hurt, that is no longer my responsibility. That is because you did something wrong. Does that make sense? Like fundamentally, if I feel hurt, that is oftentimes tied to you doing something wrong. So there's this tendency towards victimization, where we'll see even people who are like playing the victim card, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't be believing victims. I think that's exactly what happens is we started to realize that we're not taking the victims seriously, but then all the chameleons in our society were looking at this pattern, and they were realizing, okay, the fastest way for me to get ahead is to claim to be a victim. So there are all kinds of weird permutations that are happening right now with this sort of emphasis on feeling. One more evidence-based example of this is, we're seeing the prevalence of mood disorders, anxiety disorders, addictions, body dysmorphia. Basically, everything is getting worse. And so, one weird thing that started to happen is, as we talk more about feelings, there is something called the transdiagnostic factor, which we can get into. I don't know if you're familiar with these or not. But so, if you look at all of the mental illnesses, there are certain attributes that are a risk factor for multiple mental illnesses. So, a good example of transdiagnostic factors are perfectionism and rumination. So, rumination doesn't make you depressed, doesn't necessarily make you anxious. But if you have a high index of rumination, you are more likely to have a major depressive disorder, you're more likely to have an anxiety disorder. If you are perfectionistic, you're more likely to be depressed, you're more likely to be anxious. So there's one interesting diagnostic factor which has gotten way worse, which is something called distress tolerance. So human beings' capacity to sit with things and tolerate things that they do not find comfortable is starting to tank. And as that starts to tank, we're seeing just an explosion of mental illness.
Glucose is a key player in how our body functions, not just in the long term, but in every moment of our lives. That's because it is the major fuel for our cells, especially our brain cells. Glucose directly impacts our brain function, mood, and energy levels, and it may even affect our levels of tenacity and willpower. This is why I use the continuous glucose monitor from Lingo. I absolutely love it.
I need to level up now.
Lingo helps me track my glucose in real time to see how the foods I eat and the actions I take impact my glucose. When glucose in your body spikes or crashes, your cognitive and physical performance do too. In fact, large glucose peaks and valleys lead to brain fog, fatigue, irritability, and hunger. What you eat, of course, plays a major role in your glucose. Some foods cause sharp spikes and big crashes, and others do not. But not everyone is the same in terms of how they respond to particular foods. Seeing your glucose in real time helps you build eating and other habits that support metabolic health, mental clarity, and sustained energy. If you'd like to try this, Lingo is offering Huberman podcast listeners in the U.S. 10% off a 4-week Lingo plan. Terms and conditions apply. Visit hellolingo.com/Huberman for more information. The Lingo glucose system is for users 18 and older, not unlimited. It is not intended for the diagnosis of diseases, including diabetes. Individual responses may vary. Today's episode is also brought to us by Jude. Jude makes medical-grade red light therapy devices. There's one thing that I have consistently emphasized on this podcast is the incredible impact that light can have on our biology and our health. Now, in addition to sunlight, which I've talked about a lot on this podcast, red light, near-infrared, and infrared light have been specifically shown to have positive effects on improving numerous aspects of cellular and organ health. These include faster muscle recovery, improved skin health, wound healing, improvements in acne, reduced pain and inflammation, improved mitochondrial function, and even improvements in vision. Nowadays, there are a lot of red light devices out there. But what sets Jude Light apart, and why they're my preferred red light therapy device, is that they use clinically proven wavelengths, meaning they use the specific wavelengths of red light, near-infrared, and infrared light in combination to trigger the optimal cellular adaptation. Personally, I use the Jude full body panel about 3 to 4 times a week, usually for about 10 to 20 minutes per session, and I use the Jude handheld light both at home and when I travel. If you would like to try Jude, we're offering up to $400 off select products for listeners of this podcast. To learn more, visit Jude, spelled JOOVV.com/Huberman. Again, that's JOOVV.com/Huberman. The moment you said that we're seeing a reduction in distress tolerance, I heard in my head voices on the internet saying, oh, so we're just supposed to push our feelings aside, like we're just supposed to accept everything that happens to us, we're supposed to, and of course, I don't actually believe that, but I can empathize with that notion, right? Like these things are always on a continuum. It's a right? I mean, I was going to raise the same thing around the standards that were set for you. Some people who grow up with very high standards set for them by parents, teachers, or coaches might internalize that as, oh, that must mean I'm very capable. In fact, in one of my favorite books, The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch, he talks about here's what he did on Mellon, but he died and he gave his last lecture. In the lecture, he said the moment that your parents, coaches, and teachers stop pushing you is the moment you should worry because they've given up on you. If you're pushed, people believe in you. There's a chance you might actually accomplish something. They believe in you. But you can also internalize it as overwhelm. Yeah. So there's notion of distress tolerance. Like what are the standards? What are the standards for distress tolerance, for performance, for being a quote-unquote functional member of society, while also quote-unquote honoring one's feelings, about feeling one's feelings. There's no roadmap, I believe, to how to navigate that. What you said, there is no roadmap. That happens to be true and it happens to be wrong. So I'm not going to explain. So here's the first thing to understand. The way that we collect information, this is why I love the information. So like, you talked about the last lecture. So this person was saying if people don't push you, that means that they don't, care about you, they're not invested in you. They don't, the moment that you give up on someone is the moment that you stop pushing them, right? Makes perfect sense. And then there are also people who've been pushed to the point where they like crack under pressure. That's actually way more common.
So generally speaking, pressure, just like any other part of biology, I exert pressure on some part, on some joint, on some part of soft tissue, will develop a callus that will become. So this is the reason there's no roadmap is because people aren't the same, right? So we all have unique genetics, we all have unique experiences, we all have a unique internal dialogue. And so the whole point of personality, we can define personality like by the technical term, which is the way that you interpret information, the way you perceive the world, your internal reactions, and the behaviors that you engage in. So you can take literally, two different human beings in the exact same situation. I've worked with a couple of survivors of like genocidal conflicts, and the really interesting thing about that is not everybody gets PTSD, which is like really weird, right? Like if you think about this is like a genocidal conflict. So we have tons of people who all experience the same thing, but their reactions to them are really different. That's what's fun about being a clinician. What I try to focus on and what I learned, I looked for a roadmap. And what I found is that there's not a roadmap. There are thousands of roadmaps. And those roadmaps come down to, and this is, I think, a huge problem in the information-based world we live in. So everyone has problems, right? Which is great. The problem, the biggest mistake that I see people make, especially high performers, is the problem of misdiagnosis. So a really good example of this, I had a patient in my office, worked in finance, was at a very, very successful firm, came in and was like, I have really bad anxiety, like it's really hurt, like I can't eat, like I can't sleep, my wife was really worried about me, so he's like, I got really bad anxiety. So we start talking about it, and he's like, I'm afraid I'm gonna get fired. And we worked together for about 12 months, and then he realizes this environment is not where he's happy. And the reason he's gonna get fired is because he doesn't fit in, and he decides to quit. So what's really interesting is if we just solved that, if we made his anxiety go away, he was perpetuated in an unhealthy. And this is the thing that I think we forget when we're talking about our emotions. Like, Andrew, which part of the brain does anxiety come from?
Circuit line phenomenon.
Sure. If we had, how is it taught? If you had to teach someone who's taking an undergraduate neuroscience class, and maybe you wouldn't teach it this way, but if you had to localize it somewhere, where would you localize it?
One structure.
Yeah, whenever
Everyone would say amygdala. I teach neuroanatomy to medical students, so
right.
I didn't
So
so recently. So.
I'm totally with the limbic system as a whole, right? But the amygdala. And the really interesting thing is like crocodiles have amygdalas, right? So we sometimes forget that these negative emotions are actually really important for us. They're really healthy for us. One other really interesting example of this is, I work with a lot of like gamers on the internet, so sometimes they'll try to engage in dating behaviors, and they'll creep people out. And one of the really interesting things that I realized is embarrassment is the best way to not creep someone out. So if I violate one of your boundaries, and then I express embarrassment, that signals to you that I realize I did something wrong. So if I violate one of your boundaries, and then I express embarrassment,
其实是大陆的媒体哈，大家已经发现到，其实福利委员的作为在台湾的言行哈，似乎有超越这个哈中国大陆最新跟特朗普本人呐所获得的有关台湾问题的一些共识，所以他们就把这个差异性哈来写了一篇文章。尤其提醒美国的注意。我想这个部分，我想以外交的运作上来，会已经到媒体上来的话，那就是把这件事当做一个严重的事情来看待。因为大陆的认知就变成就说，这个最主要事实上的话，现在尤其是前一次美国这个川普总统到大陆访问，事实上在台湾问题上。大概双方已经达成了一个这个框架性的一个谅解，跟一个可能一个互动的一个原则了。所以呢，可是他们发觉古立言在台湾的作为好像并没有落实双方元首在有关台湾议题上的怎么讲呢的一个怎么样一个互信或者一个框架的一个谅解。双方有些事可做，有些事不可做，尤其美方对中国大陆的承诺的话，当然中国大陆认为古立言在台湾的这一些怎么讲作为言行并没有怎么讲没有忠实的在执行或者遵守特朗普对中国大陆承诺的有关台湾问题的一些做法跟言行，所以他特别讲得很清楚的，就变成就是说 认为啊，特朗普不就是说古立言啊，不满足执行既有的政策。这个政策是川普跟习近平之间谈出来的美国对台政策。他说啊，他认为他是不断自行加码，
自己加码，
没有照迁川普的原则。然后呢，前进议程，造成既成事实。尤其在中美元首完成会晤，双方明确需要管控风险、分歧、降低风险为后续高层沟通预留空间这个阶段。他说，
继续攻火。
他说，古立言是持续逆势拱火，主动抬升台海紧张烈度，人为制造新摩擦点。
是他自己制造，还说他背后有人授意让他去制造？
他是说，古立言以台特朗普的立场渐行渐远，所以他认为这是他自行不断、自行加码，都是自行的。然后他是说他的目的是什么？制造人为新闻，为下一轮中美高层互动预埋障碍。所以他这一段话已经媒体都讲出来。我认为在中国大陆跟美国的高层的外交的沟通里面，他老早已经变成一个问题人物了。中国大陆已经点出来，现在是昭告全球。其实，在外交运作上，这个不会用媒体来放话，老早就已经变成双方交谈的一个重点。说你们的古立言在台湾，他到底是照你们的政策在走呢，还是他自行？他是一个叫 autopilot， 他是一个自走炮。你们的外交官到底是用他自己的裁量空间在执行外交呢，还是听你华盛顿的这个指挥？那还是说你们根本没有对他把我们最新谈判出来的那个原则跟框架告诉古立言？
他不会不知道啊。
所以他现在认为古立言是故意的，就是说自行加码，而且他的目的是为下一轮中美高层互动预埋障碍。所以呢，这个是中国大陆对古立言现在已经点名批判了。那下一步就看古立言会不会有所反应，还是说美国政府会有所反应？所以现在变成他从中国大陆的角度来看，已经变成一个破坏中美关系的一个。所以这对古立言来讲的话，我觉得应该也是很大的一个挑战，因为。美国可能会去重新来审视一下他在台湾的言行到底有没有忠实的履行或者遵守那个美国尤其在川普跟习近平两个见面以后形成的一个新的框架原则框架，他有没有遵守？因为任何驻外人，他基本上他的言行举止都要有一个政策跟一个
我在这样子做法，
他自己的裁量空间是没有这么大的。如果他自己裁量空间，他把自己的言行规范放大过于他自己首都给他的言行规范的框架的话，那他就会自己会制造麻烦。
所以接下来会看他是不是能够继续做下去 ，AIT 的处长是不是还能够继续？
那就看美国怎么看嘛。那大陆已经把这个问题讲出来了，他认为就变成就是说，美国的对台政策是不是古立言说了算？古立言说了算，那还需要那个 Rubio 干嘛？还要川普干嘛？
这时候中共意识的时候，Rubio 你管古立言。
这个就是说，他认为他是个障碍，而且他基本上跟你美国人对中国大陆之间达到谅解之间，他在台湾的执行上是有这个冲突的地方。
为什么一直买西瓜？
我爱吃。
那你自己吃的。
但是呢，以色列会趁这个时候暗杀他的领导人呢，马上回来。快点购好康。
And that's what we have to base it on, right? Like if I'm at work and if I'm attracted to a coworker, even though there's a 90% chance that if I express something negative to them, I'm going to be fine. I can't make a strategy based on that. I have to base my strategy on the worst possible outcome. That's what we're seeing today.
You said that suppressing emotion is cognitively draining. did I also understand correctly that being in constant arousal through different emotions is also cognitively trained?
I don't know if I would use the word cognitive there, but it's absolutely trained, right? So periods of extended arousal, and this is where like when I mean cognitive training, I'm referring to a paper that's looking at the anterior cingulate cortex. So and that's where when the anterior cingulate cortex and your frontal lobes are suppressing your limbic system, that's very trained. But I think high levels of arousal, right, through the reticular activating formation and things like that, just being on emotionally, hyperactivation of your limbic system is absolutely exhausting, is the word that I use.
You mentioned distress tolerance is a valuable skill to have. It feels appropriate to say, okay, distress tolerance, I totally agree. Great to be able to tolerate distress to a point, but that sounds like it's very cognitively and generally draining. So how would you encourage someone to develop healthy levels of distress tolerance? But if that involves constant suppression of an impulse to shout, to react, that sounds like it could get very unhealthy. So I realize we're sort of staying on the tangent, but I feel like what defines healthy distress tolerance? If pushing back an emotional reaction, pushing down an emotional reaction is not good.
So distress tolerance doesn't only include emotional suppression. Right. So what's really interesting about distress tolerance is a key feature of distress tolerance is not even suppressing, is the opposite, is accepting your emotions. It's actually moving in the opposite direction.
Feeling your feelings.
Feeling your feelings, right? Recognizing that you feel your feelings.
What if somebody feels extremely angry and they want to feel their feelings? What is a healthy way for them to do that?
3 things. Okay, so if you want to learn how to control your emotions, you want to be tranquil in the face of your emotions, is what I would say. 3 things you can do. The first thing is putting words to your emotion. So the moment that, so right now, the more angry you are, right, the more your amygdala is like hyperactive. It is drowning out every other part of your brain. So the first thing that you have to do is put words to it. And when you put words to it, you can't put words to there's no word there. So the moment that you try to put words to it, it has to calm down. In order for your linguistic centers, Broca's area, and all this, in order for them to like articulate it, you have to understand it. So Freud understood this like over 100 years ago, and there's something powerful about processing emotions by putting them into words. In order for words, you have to tone it down some. So that's the first thing. People oftentimes think that that is sufficient. Right? So people go see a therapist and talk about your feelings. Man, the number of times that I've had, like I had this patient who came in, I can tell a story, please. And so like I was a third-year resident. I'd done maybe like 100 hours of 200 hours. So I had a guy come in, he'd been in the clinic for 8 years. He came in, he was sad every day. He was like, I got written up for work.
差不多还没吃
People
完
laughed at them. One of the patients is complaining because I didn't give him benzos. So he'd come in every week. I'd be like, why are you depressed, bro? And he'd like tell me some story about something bad. And like, right? So I'm like, I'm supposed to be supportive and I'm supposed to be. How does that make you feel? We do this thing. I'm like, hey, is this helping? And he's like, what do you mean is it helping? I'm like, is it helping? Do you feel any better than when you did 6 months ago? And he's like, I thought this was what we're supposed to do. I'm supposed to come in every week. I tell you about how it's bad. And then you tell me what to be like, isn't that what psychotherapy is? It was a huge light bulb moment for me because talking about your feelings, especially for men, is not enough. Fascinating. Putting words to it is just step 1. Second is a really important skill. Cultivating additional emotions. So if you look at people who are resilient, if you tunnel down into the internal dialogue of people who are resilient, you'll notice that some interesting things. So my patients who are very severe, right? Literally, I try to work with them over the course of weeks. And I feel overwhelmed. The moment that you start cultivating additional emotions, I've been dumped by my boyfriend. I'm really, really depressed. I'm going to be alone. Okay, I had
为什么？
我吃一个那个 strawberry coconut muffin， 还有一个那个巧克力的饼干，被算了7磅多，差不多本钱只有1磅多。
And you don't just have to tolerate it or suppress it. These are the additional things that you do. And this is really important. It's not just cultivating positive emotions when you're feeling negative. It's the other way around as well. All relationships ruined by falling in love. Falling in love with the wrong person. Somebody else. So many people I work with, I have this great business idea.
Chiều
And I
khi
get
nó
so
nói
excited
nói
about
tỏ
it. I'm like, I'm
nói
going
là
to start this
kiểu
AI company. That's the time that you actually want to cultivate negative emotion. Cultivate a little bit of anxiety. What could go wrong?
可是我
Make
买
sure
那
you
件
ask
爸爸
yourself
也说挺好看
like literally
现在衣服没地方买，都是那样的，
that we use with people wear.
都是跟老人一样。他因为老人也会穿年轻的，他要转
I'm really
他要
excited right now.
做
We
那
want to
个
do this thing. But play the tape.
Like a-
What are all the negative things that
普遍的能穿的，知道
flexibility, that emotional flexibility?
英國老人也較好人
We
家
have to understand what emotions are. So a
那
lot of
老
times
人也
we
會
just
穿
don't
年輕的
on
衣
the internet
服
to, like, feel
英
your
國人
feelings, right?
他不會
Like,
笑
I'm just
笑，
gonna
他覺得你
wait,
歧
I'm
視
gonna
我
be
老
honest
人，
with my feelings today.
是不是？
You're an asshole, Andrew, and this is my truth, right? So we started like
老人
speaking
都
our
穿年輕
truths
的衣服，
as excuses to being assholes. Like that's what's happening
不
on the
美
internet. It's what's happening in real relationships because people are watching social media. They're like, I should speak my
但
truth.
是那
Right?
個冇咧，真係因
So
為
the
你
other
妹
thing that's really
妹，
important is to understand that an emotion
這都
is
不要
not a
妹妹
thing.
了。
An emotion is literally an evolutionary perspective, and you
我
may
我
know
建
that.
議無論美國那
It's
個牙醫
information and is motivation. That's what emotions are for. So when you feel fear, when you're walking outside, walk into the outhouse in the middle of the night, and you feel fear, that is so all this sensory input is being processed in parts of your brain that you have no conscious awareness of. The first thing that happens is that you feel emotion before you have any logical idea of what are you even scared of. That is your brain telling you something. The other thing is it's motivation, right? I feel like running away. And this is where, unfortunately, our brain evolved for a world that we don't live in anymore. So, back when I used to feel fear because I was being hunted by a tiger, the natural impulses that our fear encourage us to do don't work when you've got to pay rent at the end of the month, or you've got to pay your mortgage, or you've got to do well on your performance review. So oftentimes what we do is we think that feeling authentically means letting our emotion run the show. We don't want to do that. We want to ask ourselves, what is this emotion telling me? Why do I feel fear? What am I afraid of? And I don't even think what am I afraid of is the right question. It's way too like self-help. It's way too psychotherapy for me. It's what is my fear telling me?
What is the information and motivation that it's signaling?
Yeah, and then what is it telling me to do?
Like your client who was feeling very anxious all the time, by exploring that emotion, eventually it sounds like came to the understanding that it wasn't the job for him.
Perfect, right? That this is not the, and so he's trying so hard, right? So the anxiety is like clinging on to his job, but actually once you understand the emotion, it's actually walking away. And so once you have mastery over your emotions in this way, and I think mastery is maybe a better word, it makes life like so much better. Right? That's when we talk about distress tolerance, like that's what I'm talking about. It's not just suppression.
Wonderful. I so appreciate your answer, the thoroughness of it, the clarity of it. Distress tolerance is putting words to emotion, adding additional language to it, and exploring the reverse context as well, the negative aspects, the positive emotions,
Yeah,
the positive aspects. So it sounds like it's broadening the time domain, like thinking about this in going forward, what does this represent in the past, present, and future, and then really thinking about what the emotion is signaling. What a beautiful description of distress tolerance, because it's also operational. People can put this to work. Thank you. That's fantastic. If you're a regular listener of the Huberman Lab podcast, you've no doubt heard me talk about the vitamin mineral probiotic drink AG1. And if you've been on the fence about it, now's an awesome time to give it a try. For the next few weeks, AG1 is giving away a full supplement package with your first subscription to AG1. They're giving away a free bottle of vitamin D3K2, a bottle of omega-3 fish oil capsules, and a sample pack of the new sleep formula AGZ, which, by the way, is now the only sleep supplement I take. It's fantastic. My sleep on AGZ is out of this world. AGZ is a drink, so it eliminates the need to take a lot of pills. It tastes great, and like I said, it has me sleeping incredibly well, waking up more refreshed than ever. I absolutely love it. Again, this is a limited time offer, so make sure to go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to get started today. The roadmap. If we could go back to the roadmap, if you could spell out for us, what do you think of as the roadmap to navigate this very complex landscape that we exist in now?
Okay.
And this could be relationship with this person. It could be a doctor, go to an Ivy League school versus be an artist, or any number of different examples where we have to make the distinction of what's wished for us and expected of us versus what is true to us on the inside. Okay, that seems to be where the friction of life exists.
Absolutely.
So that to me is the most interesting question in life, frankly.
Let me just make sure I understand your question. The friction and joy of life is the rest of the world wants me to do all of these things. And sometimes this doesn't want to do those things. Sometimes it does want to do those things. When do I listen to this? And when do I listen to everything that? Right? Okay, beautiful question. So this is where I'm going to lean into the Eastern stuff for a second. So I spent 7 years studying to become a monk. And then I went to medical school and I became a psychiatrist. And the really interesting, I had a really weird experience of training in psychiatry. because everyone was teaching me how the mind works. Okay, this is like good teachers at like the Harvard Medical School, and they're like, here's how the mind works, and this is what the subconscious is, and like there's cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So like Aaron Beck taught us that there's like thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and all these things connect. And the really fascinating thing, my most instinctive response when people would tell me how it is no, it's not. So in the East, they have a completely different conception of mind. And here's the big problem with the Western conception of mind. You're a scientist, right? How do you learn about something, Andrew?
You have a question.
Okay,
You
good.
pose a hypothesis.
Excellent.
You design an experiment.
Good.
Where you isolate variables.
Okay.
And you either refute or you, in some sense, support your hypothesis.
Okay.
And then you design another experiment.
Okay.
And ask
Right?
another
Okay.
question. You
So-
just keep going.
So,
and then
Andrew-
you get tenure, and then you start a podcast.
Beautiful, right? Yeah.
Just kidding.
No. So let me ask you this: how do you study the mind?
Yeah.
Here's what's
Yeah, I
really
do not
interesting,
know.
right? So here's what's really fascinating. Like, do we have any scientific evidence of the existence of thought?
We could define thoughts as some
You-
pattern of network activity.
What I mean is, like, if we literally look at it, we have no instrument that can detect a thought,
That's right.
right? So we have no proof. We cannot measure a thought. Like, it is like literally impossible. We can measure blood flow to the brain. We can measure electrical activity in the brain. We can induce thoughts, right? We can do that, but we have no idea that a thought exists. So like psychiatry is weird because every other part of medicine and science, we can measure what we are studying. In psychiatry, we can't do that. So along came Freud, and he made a fascinating discovery, which is when a human being speaks, we understand something about what's in their mind. And the whole reason we get trained, and the reason that we can measure measure your mind, right? So we have validated scientific instruments using things like factor analysis and stuff like that, where we can use the Beck Depression Inventory, which will tell you how depressed you are. We have good ways to measure stuff. So there's a lot of science in psychiatry. The basic problem, though, is that we have a fundamental problem. We have no insight into what is in we have insight into someone's mind, but we can't detect the mind. That is a fundamental problem with science, okay? Here's the cool thing. We have no scientific measurement of thought. But we as human beings have measurement of thoughts. Can I ever know what you were thinking using any instrument of science?
You're the psychiatrist, so I'm tempted to say yes, but no.
No, right? Can you know what you're thinking?
I would like to think so, but I'm guessing.
Yes.
I mean, I can ask myself what's going on in there, but I don't necessarily have the ability to put language to it in a way that captures
Fine,
what
but
I'm
you are
thinking.
capable of observing your thoughts. You are capable. I'm not capable of observing your thoughts. But you can, whether you detect all of them, whether they're right or wrong, that question is separate. Just the fundamental idea of like you can measure an axon, you can detect your thought, right? We all live in this way, right? So that we can get to the edge cases later. So here's the cool thing. So when I went to India and I studied for 7 years, the difference between the psychology that was developed from the contemplative traditions is its foundation is internal observation. So yogis are capable, it's not like some special ability, but they base their theory of mind on what they could observe. Whereas in the West, that is not something we have access to. So their theory of mind is very different. So when I was training to become a psychiatrist, people were like, this is how the mind works. And I'm like, no, that's not true, right? There is a different way. So here's one example, getting to the roadmap. So the biggest thing that I think is different is the ego. So in the East, they have the concept of a part of our mind that is the ego. And in the West, we use the word ego. Freud defined it in some way. We all have this intuitive sense of identity, but in the same way that logic and emotions interact in a very mechanistic and defined way, in the West, our model does not include this piece. And the roadmap that you're talking about has to do with that piece. So if the rest of the world, because things get complicated, right? That's why it's so exciting for you and so challenging. Things get complicated, so everyone wants you to be something. And then we make a big mistake because we do this thing called internalize. And the moment that you internalize, now is it coming from the outside or is it coming from you? Is this something that I've been conditioned to want, or is it something that I truly want? Which then begs the question, what the hell is truly want? Is there a difference between want from over here and want from over there? And the yogis will say that the answer is yes. So once you understand the ego, and the ego functions in a couple of ways. If I ask you, Andrew, who are you? What would you say?
Andrew.
Okay. Is that it?
I mean, I have a list of roles that I occupy in
Very
life.
good.
I mean,
Are those you?
They're facets of me.
Okay. Right. So anything that you can use to describe tenured professor at Stanford.
I wouldn't put that first, but that happens
Sure.
to be true. I'm a brother.
Brother.
I'm a boyfriend.
Skater.
Once a skater, always a skater. But yes,
Right.
I'm a public educator.
Great.
I'm a son, a friend.
All of that stuff is ego.
Mhm.
Okay. So ego is anything. When you say I am ... anything that defines you after that is actually part of your ego. And the interesting thing is that it's not that the ego is bad. This is a common misconception, but like ego, we all need ego to function in the world. If you are okay not functioning in the world and you're moving towards enlightenment, then you no longer need ego. But generally speaking, we need ego. So, if you're looking for a roadmap of what you truly want in life and what is healthy for you and not healthy for you, when you say you're Andrew, right, there's a lot of other people who can claim to be Andrew, but they're not you. You're talking about a fundamental internal experience of the self. And you were Andrew before you were a boyfriend. You were Andrew, you've always been a son. But you were Andrew before you even knew you were a son, right? Right? You were still Andrew. So there's a fundamental like bundle of experience. That's really what you are. And I think that the best road, if you're trying to figure out what to do in life, try to peel away the layers of your ego. And I know that's getting complicated. But if we sort of think about like, what is it that like practically gets us jammed up in life is when I try to be something. I know this is going to sound weird. I'm sure you have ambition, but I don't think you are where you are because of your ambition. I think you are where you are because you listen to this internal voice and not try to live up to external expectations.
100%. I can truly say that every choice I've made to get into, fish and animals when I was a kid, obsessed with birds and fish, and then skateboarding, and then biology and science, and where I'm at now has been some sense of an internal passion and something pulling me from the outside. And it's just I just go.
Right.
Those choices were always made because I knew in my heart's heart there was no other option in the positive sense.
Yeah,
I'm going.
Yeah,
I'm pulled toward it, and I'm driven toward it.
Right. So you are listening to a part of you, right? So it is an internal thing that the world then meets you halfway. So it makes it possible where there's a whole thing about that.
For me, it's a physical energy.
Fine.
If I feel physical energy coming up in my body and I want to move towards something, and for some reason I feel it more in my left arm than anywhere else, this has always been true. I'll have a thought, and I know, and that's when I go, oh my goodness, I'm going to do this thing. I know I'm going to do it, and there's no backing out because it has to happen. That's how it feels.
Yeah. Right. So any desire that you have that comes from the sense organs is probably not this thing. So the sense organs can trigger something within you, but if we look at like social media, half the problem is that the hardest problem I have as a psychiatrist is convincing people that they don't really want the things that they say they want. It's like so crazy, right? Like we're being programmed, we're being conditioned. And I realized this the other day when like I was like, man, like I wish I talked to my agent about like doing more talks. Like I want to go someplace and like get like paid speaking engagements. And I realized I actually hate that. I don't like that. It's just what I thought people like us do. And I've done a couple of them, which have been really fantastic, and I really enjoy that. But I like sitting with people, right? So we're trained, and just think about it. Like anyone who's listening to this, think about all the shit that you've seen that you think you want, but you don't really want. You just like look at other people and you're like, yeah, I want that thing. It can be a particular kind of relationship. It can be a particular job. Like, we all want like all this random stuff. It's all coming from our sense organs, right? This is why advertising is a thing. So stepping away from sense organs is really important for that roadmap. Second thing is anything that you want that is a comparison. That is born of the ego. The ego is what defines you, right? So we can say tenured professor. We can say associate part-time instructor. And so any comparison requires a definition. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Like, so all of the gold medalists, silver medalists, bronze medalists, that's a comparative thing. If I say I'm a silver medalist, then my desire for the gold medal can come out of the ego. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, it makes it. The reason I'm so with my hand below my lip is because I'm so struck by this, because I've had this feeling for a while now that most of the danger in life comes from the feeling that we need to prove something to others or to ourselves.
Yep.
And yet I know it's healthy to prove things to myself. Like, it's felt good to be able to accomplish certain things. And I did that. Like, I could do other difficult things. But the origin of all of that work, in my mind, it's only healthy, at least for me, if it's not by virtue of trying to prove something. It's like there's a difference between a genuine heart's desire, for lack of a better way to put it, and what you're calling a pursuit of trying to win at some game in one's head. It's like a video game that isn't real.
Yeah, it's not that it's not real, right? So I agree with you 100%, and I think there's a couple of important things. So, proving yourself is not wholly wrong, but understand that it is the ego. That's what it's going to gratify, right? So if you have an ego of I am a loser, by all means, so this is part of the process. I have people in my office who are losers, for lack of a better term. 29 years old, living at home, playing video games all day, watching pornography, no job, dropped out of college. And so what they want more than anything else is to be a winner. And so my work involves two steps. First, let's help you go from loser to winner. And then let's abandon the whole paradigm. Because I've also had people in my office who are billionaires. and finally get to retire at the age of 52 after having sold their amazing third company. And then after retirement, it's not enough. They want to make another billion. They want to do something else. So like, you know, that loser to winner, like your mind will continually move the goalposts. If you were hungry before you got it, the thing won't fulfill your hunger. It may for a little while, and then you have to take another step of like, okay, losing and winning is now done, right? And I think you've gone through that. I can hear it in your words, and people can probably hear it too. Like the way that probably at some point in your life, being a tenured, I don't know why. That's just the thing that is the thing that people are the lustiest for, right? In the world that I think we come from.
It felt good to get.
Right.
And I won't lie, it felt good to get at a place like Stanford.
Yeah.
Even though there are many fantastic
Yep.
and extremely challenging places to achieve that. It felt like the culmination of 20 years of very hard work that I enjoyed, but that it represented an important milestone for me.
Yeah.
But I knew, I'll just say, and of course we're talking about this example, but hopefully people are thinking about examples in their own lives. But I knew, for instance, I never want to be a department chair.
Yeah.
Tons of work doing administrative stuff. I remember when they told me you'll be vice chair, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I have to do to avoid that?
Yeah.
I also knew that I didn't care about being a member of the National Academy. A close childhood friend of mine was just elected to the National Academy of Sciences. We've been friends since we were 7, and I'm so happy for him because he's doing exactly what he loves. But I never aspired to be a member of the National Academy, ever. Why? Because what came after tenure in order to go there was a divergence from what I really wanted to do.
Yeah, so I think this is the key thing about the roadmap, right? So like we get conditioned by our sense organs. So like just to keep it super practical, if you're trying to figure out what you should do, is this coming from my sense organs? If your sense organ triggers something that's always been within you, right? So if you see like a frog and like you really want to be interested, like you want to figure out how the frog works. But the interesting thing about the difference between the sense organ thing and an internal drive is your internal drive will find multiple objects in the outside world, right? So first it was biology, then it was frogs, now it's neuro-ophthalmology, now it's this. So I don't know if this kind of makes sense. The drive is always the same, and it'll encounter different things in the world.
Yes. What is that drive?
We'll get to that in a second, okay? So first thing for practically is like if you're trying to figure out what should I do, first ask yourself, how have you been conditioned by social media? Move away from that. Second thing is be careful about any comparisons you make. Any motivation that you have to, because of a comparison, it can lead to success. You can be successful, but you won't be happy. Because it's so annoying, right? So when I want, like, I work with a lot of influencers and YouTubers and stuff. And so it's like, oh, we want our first million. And if you're not careful, the moment that you get your first million, like you want a second million. And then you want a third million. And then it's even scarier, right? So like, oh, I got 3 million subscribers. That's awesome. But then you know what's really terrifying, Andrew? Is a guy who started after me is getting followers faster than I'm getting them. Right? And so the ego is never going to be satisfied. The ego by its nature is comparative. And even if you're number one, people think the most anxious people I've ever worked with, not actually true, but is people who get to the top. And you think that you're done. You're not done. Then you're looking behind you at all of the people who are younger, harder working, have the benefit of AI tools, have the benefit of the path that you have carved, who are catching up on you and will overtake you soon enough. So one good example of why we compare is the more you are judged, the more your ego grows, and the more you will compare, right? So this is almost like we're taught how to, when people judge us, we judge ourselves, and we get judged based on ranking. And so, this is what we see on the internet as social media, as we start to get judged more and more and more, we become more and more narcissistic. This is the narcissistic defense that tries to protect us from judgment. And so it's happening to everybody, and it's escalating. The rate at which it's happening, people are more egotistical than they've ever been.
Do you think that's especially true for people who have large followings on social
Absolutely.
media?
I mean, so I work with influencers and was so curious about the work that I was doing that I tried to develop a program. So now I have like a creator coaching program where we're like collecting data about whether it's effective or not. And so the really interesting thing is I think it's a unique like effect on our psychology. The closest thing is like, a lot of celebrities are like really messed up. And that's because they have so many eyes on them. And people don't realize, just as a simple example, the brain just doesn't think probabilistically. So you can have 1,000 people love the work that you do, but all it takes is one person who's really nasty. That is what your brain is going to focus on. It's going to highlight, it's amazing. I can be looking at like chat that is scrolling during live streaming. There are messages that are faster than I can read. But if someone says something that is dangerous, my mind will flag.
Wow.
Right?
It's like a predator on the horizon.
Absolutely. So we have these circuits which were designed to look at a jungle and see a single pair of tiger's eyes. And so the danger scanning mechanism makes it so that the bigger that you get and the more eyes that are on you, the more paranoid you have to be, the more narcissistic you will have to become. Because when someone turns to you and says, you are ugly, you are stupid, in order to defend against that, you have to say, no, I'm not. I am beautiful. I am intelligent. And the more times that you say that to yourself, this is where things get complicated, but that doesn't result in confidence. So I don't know if this makes sense, but if you are confident, you don't need to say that I'm smart or that I'm beautiful. Does that kind of make sense?
What about the, to each their own mindset? Like some people will like the content. I tell myself this, some people will like the content and the way I frame it, and we'll look at it on the whole, some episodes more than others, etc. Certain things, and others won't. They'll hate it for whatever reason, or hate me for whatever reason, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, so I think you're doing a really important thing, which is like a key takeaway. So when someone dislikes what you do, you think about them and not you. That's the opposite of ego, right? So if we take someone who's very narcissistic and they receive a criticism, they say, no, I'm great, right? So this is where, like, literally, I don't know if this is too abstract, but I'll give kind of like maybe a simpler example of this. So, I trained in Boston. There was a lot of K2 use. So K2 is like synthetic marijuana. And so like sometimes like you walk into the emergency room, there's a dude who's like high on meth or like high on K2. Like, he's just saying all kinds of terrible things. That has nothing to do with me, right? And the way that you framed, some people are going to like what you do and some people are not going to like what you do. That's on them. So if we want to step away from the ego, we have to understand that, don't take it personally. Like, literally, that's the colloquial phrase, right? But it's hard to do. So if you're someone at home trying to figure out, okay, how do I connect with my true self? How do I step away from my ego? Notice your reaction to criticism. Is your reaction of criticism, are you actually being empathic? Right? So what empathic really means is, are you putting yourself in someone else's shoes? And the other person, hey, maybe not everybody likes pineapple on pizza. Or are you taking it personally? Do their insults determine your value as a human being? And the moment that starts to happen, the friction that you're talking about, which can be so fun, becomes torture. Because now you have to make them happy. In order to feel good about yourself, you have to make the people around you happy.
So interesting. I think some of us grew up or somehow internalized the idea that if somebody is angry or is criticizing us and it's being delivered in a